Okay, this week in our tour of the Bible lands, we are going to the city of Shechem, and I've heard the word Shechem, and I've heard of this city, but to me in my mind, it's always been the city with that weird name. Shechem just comes across to me as a weird name city, and that was every time I hear the word Shechem, that's what I think about. And studying this week, I really just was floored with how important this city was, or how much of a role it played in the whole Bible history. And so this may be a part one and part two, type of lesson, because I was up this morning early, still trying to get this lesson together. And it's like there is so much more that I wanted to say. So Shechem and Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, they're basically the same location. Also, another city called Sychar, basically the same location in the whole concept of things here. So we might have to do a part one and a part two. But that is a side view of Shechem there. Shechem is kind of in the center there, right in that valley, right before you get in between Mount Gerizim, which we're facing west here. So Mount Gerizim is the southern one. It's on the left side. And Mount Ebal, that's on the northern side. And Shechem is right there at that neck. And Sychar is actually, we believe, just a little bit down below, if you can see my cursor there. But it's just a little bit down below Shechem, we think. All right. There's no, there's not a 100% agreement on where Sychar is, but Shechem, yeah, it's right here. Okay, all right. As I say, always look at maps and kind of get to know where things are. And as we are covering the areas of Samaria, last week we started in Samaria, so we are going to look. Now we know where Samaria is. It's right pretty much in the center, and then we're going to look around and see what's around it. So we can base our knowledge on, like when we were doing the Sea of Galilee and all those cities there, we had Sea of Galilee as kind of a frame of reference. And then, this city was over here on the left, and that city was over there to the north. All right, well, Samaria, smack dab in the center. And then you got Shechem and Sychar pretty much to the east of it. Actually, I think on this map, it's a little incorrect. I think it's a little south a little bit more. But there it is right there. Okay. This is another map. I always say, look at different maps, and you can see as you are traveling from, you don't have Jerusalem on this map. It's just right here below Benjamin. But as you're going north, if you wanted to get from Jerusalem to, the Galilee area, and you wanted to just head straight through, Samaria territory, you would basically come up, pass by Shiloh, come up north. And Shechem, you would pass through Shechem if you were going straight through the Samaritan area in order to get to the Galilee. And you can see here, if you could look really close, I know it's hard to tell, the detail and everything like that, but you can see Shechem is just right there at that neck, that saddle, geographical saddle in between, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim there. And you can see the little dots here that shows the different trade routes, the different quote unquote highways as they go between various cities. And you can see Shechem, this pretty much, if you wanted to control the Canaan area here, the Samaritan area, you'd have to control Shechem there. And it was very important. It was on the routes of trade and everything like that. All right. Here's a zoomed in version of it. Same map, just zoomed in a lot more. Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim on the south side, and Shechem pretty much right there in between them. Okay. And this is, if you were looking at a Google map today, and you were looking at it as like the terrain of it, it's very interesting. It's, I think, from this peak here to this peak over here, it's less than a mile. So you got Mount Ebal peak here and Mount Gerizim peak here. So when you think of Shechem today in modern times, it's pretty much the city of Nablus. And you hear about Nablus every now and then, with the news, a lot of difficult things going on there. It's mostly an Arab place, Muslim place. So it's not always the safest for Jewish pilgrims don't go there, and we might get into that a little bit more if we have time about the difficulties. If you're Jewish trying to get to there to some of these sites like Jacob's Well, which is right here, and then Joseph's tomb right here. Let me point out a couple of things on this map. Not only do you see the terrain there, but look at this bowl here, and we're going to talk about this bowl right here surrounding where that word Nablus is. When they were doing the allotting the tribes, and you had some of the tribes, on the southern side, and some of the tribes on the northern side, and they're in the middle speaking. Today you can't do it because it's just full of buildings. There's, more, stuff in the way. But before a lot of those buildings were built back in the 1800s, somebody wrote about how they did a test there. Somebody stood in the center, and then somebody got on the southern side up here on the side of the mountain, and somebody got over here on the northern side on the side of the mountain, and somebody stood in the middle and talked and shouted, and they could be heard. It was the perfect amphitheater on both sides so that somebody could speak and you would hear it all over. So it makes sense. This is a good place to allot the tribes. The other things to note, we'll get into it more, but Joseph's tomb is right here. Now, we don't have a guarantee that that's his tomb, but, starting around the 300s, it was recognized this is where Joseph was buried and his bones was brought back. Jacob's Well, a very good, solid chance that this exactly was Jacob's Well. And you won't see it on this map, but right here, pretty much right where it says Joseph's tomb and just a little bit below. It's not very far from the Jacob's Well, but it's right here in this area. That is where the ancient city of Shechem was, and they call it Tell Balata, the hill of Balata. But that is Shechem, biblical Shechem. The only thing we don't see on here is the word Sychar. But it is believed, most people would believe that Ascar right here was the city of Sychar. Not a 100% agreement on that, but I do think it is, in my opinion, after what I've been reading. But, I'm not going to argue with anybody too in depth on it, but to me that is the most logical place where Sychar was. Yes, sir.
Other than Joseph's tomb and Jacob's Well, what other things come to my mind when you hear the place Shechem?
Oh, okay. So the question is what should you think about when you think about the place of Shechem? So much. And that's why I think that today I may not be able to get through all this, because when you're talking about Shechem, you really need to talk about Mount Gerizim, and you really need to talk about Mount Ebal, and then, of course, the story of the woman at the well with Jesus. You've got Jacob's Well. There's so many things to think about, but that's not only it. And we're going to have to get into it because there's like a whole list of stuff. And we're going to cover through those. And then in the end, I have like a bullet points. These are the things you want to think about. So you're way ahead of me, but we'll get to it.
Okay.
All right.
As my mother would say, boys, you always have to have something to look forward to.
You always have to have something to look forward to. That's correct. Okay. But yes, I was just really floored at how significant this place was. I've always thought it was, again, just a city with a weird name. But the more I studied this, I just wish I had known more about it. And I wished I had when we went to Israel last year. I wished I would have had a chance to go here. But, there's security issues with trying to get here. Okay, let's move forward. And I mentioned Tell Balata a while ago. This is kind of an overview and what you see there at the archaeological dig. And this is where ancient Shechem was. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted to show you a quick picture of it. So if you were looking at Shechem from the east side and you're facing west, again, here's another picture. You got Mount Ebal. This is the Mount of Curses, and we're going to get into that story later. And Mount Gerizim on the left side, or the southern side, is the Mount of Blessings, and you got Shechem in the middle. I kind of like this because it kind of shows it's right there in the middle, and it's a really cool place because you can stand in the middle before they built all these buildings, and somebody on this side could hear you, and somebody on that side could hear you because it was a perfect place where your sounds got amplified. Okay, I like this diagram, and I threw it in here. You kind of got Mount Gerizim over here on the left side, on the southern side, Mount Ebal here, Shechem. They kind of put it more in the middle, but it was actually more down here at Tell Balata. right here. Askar, which we think is the city of Sychar, which is pretty much just right there at Shechem. Joseph's tomb and Jacob's well, and then you see all the traveling roads to get through there. Shechem was a very important stop if you wanted to get somewhere, and if you wanted to get into central Samaria, you would definitely pass through Shechem and go towards the coast. Okay, and I do want to point this out that I do not. Yeah, this right here where it says 1 kilometer and it kind of gives you the scale, I don't believe that's accurate, just based on what I've been seeing here. I had to double check that, but I don't think that scale is correct right there. But anyway, it is north, oriented to the north. Okay, all right. So Shechem. The other thing that we can think about, remember a few weeks ago I mentioned the 6 cities of refuge, where if you accidentally killed somebody, before the family came and captured you, you could actually run to these cities to kind of gain not immunity, but gain a little bit of a refuge until that a hearing could be done. And we mentioned Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron, which are the cities that were west of the Jordan. Shechem is one of those cities, and it's situated. And here's something else that we're going to notice, and I'm going to bring it up to you, is which tribe is Shechem in? There's a couple places in the Bible it would suggest that it belonged to the tribe of Ephraim, and then there's places in the Bible where it says in the territory of Manasseh, and that was like, okay, that's wild. Which one does it belong to? And as you can see on this map here on the right side, it's actually right on the border. And when you read Joshua 17:7, right here, the territory of Manasseh extended from Asher to Mikmethath, east of Shechem. It didn't say it extended to Shechem. It just said to Mikmethath. Problem is we don't know where Mikmethath is. It's not a city. We have a couple thoughts. Well, when I say we, I'm talking about scholars. Have a couple thoughts where it's at. There's a couple of scholars that would say Mikmethath is actually a geographical feature and not necessarily a city. So it's really hard to tell where it goes. So, but the thing is that it looks like, in my opinion, based on the reading of it, Shechem is actually in the territory of Manasseh, but it's part of the Ephraim Hills, if that makes sense. It's in the Ephraim Hills, which extends outside of its territory. So sometimes when you read it in the Bible, you'll say Shechem in the territory of the Ephraim Hills, and you might think, oh, it's the tribe of Ephraim. No, not exactly. It's not exactly saying that from what I'm reading and my understanding. So just so you know, Shechem is right on the border. Sometimes you might think that, depending on who you ask, and if you ask AI, it's going to come back and say, oh, it's in the territory of Ephraim. And you might get the opinion that it was allotted to Ephraim. No, it seems to be allotted to Manasseh. But anyway, it's one of those points. I don't know if it's really so important to really argue the details of it. Just know that sometimes you're going to see it's in the territory of Ephraim, and sometimes you're going to see it in the territory of Manasseh. All right? Okay. So why that distinction? Yeah, I already mentioned it. It's in the territory of Manasseh, but sometimes it's mentioned as in the heartland. And they called it in the range of Mount Ephraim, or the hill country of Ephraim. So you're going to see it both ways. Okay, all right. Shechem. One of the things you think about, Jack, when you look at Shechem, is it was the first place that Abram stopped in Canaan, and he built his altar to God. And it's one of the earliest cities you're going to read about in the Bible. It goes all the way back to Genesis 12. And you see down there below, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. This is not the actual altar. I just found a rock and put it there. This is an altar, but it may be like a Canaanite altar, but don't know. I just threw it in as a decoration here. Alrighty. And then the next thing is, what is the great tree of Moreh? And again, there's so many things to talk about with Shechem, but the great tree of Moreh, there was this tree there in Shechem. It was an ancient, big tree. It was a very distinct tree that people would gather at and in Shechem. And Abraham built his first altar to God after receiving a promise that his descendants would inherit this. And kind of this tree served as a landmark. This is not the actual tree, by the way. Just a picture. The tree is long gone. But we do know that the tree was situated near Shechem. It was between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Sometimes it's called the oak of the teacher or diviner's oak. And it was, there's thought that the Canaanites would go to this tree and consult their oracles. Okay. Significance in the Bible is this is where God first appeared to Abram in Canaan, and it, marked a pivotal, I can't say the word pivotal spot for the establishment of the covenant. And it also may be the exact same location where Jacob buried the foreign idols of his family that you read about in Genesis 35. And, we see on the verse to the right, so they gave Jacob all the foreign gods they had and the rings in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem. It could be the exact same spot. All right. Let's see. And you can also think of this as symbolic, as this land is now going to shift from being a Canaanite location for idolatry to worship, and changing it to worshiping the one true God as Abraham built an altar there. Okay. Next. So the next thing we want to think about with Shechem is this is, where Jacob purchased land here. And he dug, it is suggested that Jacob dug the well, but, and we'll read this verse here. After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver, he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. And there he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. All right. So the Bible, when we talk about Jacob's well, the Bible doesn't really say Jacob dug this well. It's just called, Jacob's well. But the belief is, if you read about it in John 4, this is a key verse where, the Samaritan woman asked Jesus, "Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" And then we read in 5 and 6, these verses establish location, noting that the well was on a plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son near the city of Sychar, which on that map it would be Asker. So this Old Testament passage, we know that Jacob purchased this land near Shechem, near Sychar, after returning from Padan Aram, but it doesn't mention digging a well. But in the New Testament, the woman says, this is the well that Jacob dug. So, did Jacob dig this well? Well, according to the woman in the New Testament, yes, he did. Do we have definite evidence in the Old Testament, or was she wrong, or anything? But we don't know. But if you asked pretty much any teacher in Islam, any teacher in Jewish thought, or any scholar from Christianity, they would all agree that this was Jacob's well. It makes sense. It fits in at everything, that this is the plot of land that he bought. And if you go to Jacob's well today, you would see this this church building here. It's Greek Orthodox, I believe, and we'll get into it a little bit more. But this church was only finished in 2007. So very, very recent. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if that's the next chapter. Okay, so Jacob's well. Let's talk about it first. All right. So it's near the site of Jesus' famous encounter with the Samaritan woman. And I'm going to show you pictures from the well here in a second. It was, and the encounter was at a town called Sychar. It's identified as Askar, immediately next to Tell Balata. And the well is only 250 meters, basically a quarter of a kilometer, from the ruins of Tell Balata. We know that Jesus, a Jew, asked a Samaritan woman for water, and this broke two major social taboos. Men didn't typically speak to unrelated women in public. And Jews and Samaritans, as you know, were kind of in this deep, centuries old. They had this little Cold War over religious purity. And then, there was this talk of living water. She was, talking about where are we going to worship at? Where do we worship at? Mount Gerizim or Jerusalem? And it's funny when she's asking this, Mount Gerizim, which you're standing at the base of it, you're looking up right at it, when she asks this question. And then, this is where Jesus says, you've had 5 husbands, and the dude you're with now is not your husband. And then she perceives that he is a prophet, and she pivots to becoming one of the first people to proclaim him as the coming Messiah. All right. So, yeah, I already mentioned this. From the ruins of Tell Balata, you can look up and see the summit of Gerizim. It's right there. And the Samaritans believe that Gerizim was the chosen place of God, while Jews held to the temple in Jerusalem. And you could see, why later on when we talk about Mount Gerizim. This is where, on both sides they did the blessings and the curses, and Joshua at this location, a lot of, where the tribes were going to be. Okay, so in the end result, there at Jacob's well, this woman becomes one of the first evangelists. She left her jar and runs back to the town, which Iskar is pretty much right there, and then starts, talking about him. Okay, and again, I'm going right back to the map. Jacob's well is right here, and just a few meters away is Joseph's tomb. And then a few meters over here, where my mouse cursor is, that's where the, Tell Balata is, where they, ancient Shechem. There's also a kind of a building there, a temple. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, that location. And then Askar over here to the right is believed to be where Sychar was. Okay. Jacob's well, this is actually a picture of the well. But, getting with regards to Jacob's well, everybody is, I think it's unanimous or near unanimous as you can get that, yeah, this is the well. This is where Jesus was. This is where the woman from Sychar was. This is it. And we're going to show you, these are the pictures of it right there. This picture was taken around the 1900s. And so Jacob's well had multiple churches built on it, destroyed, built on it, destroyed, built on it, destroyed. And at this time it was destroyed. And I think the Greek Orthodox Church had bought this land, I don't remember, 18 something, and they started building on it, and we'll get into a little bit more. I don't want to give too many details, get too far ahead. Just know that there was multiple churches on this location. Okay, so that's this is an old picture, a woman coming up, she's got one on her head. I think the well is like down, there's a stairway here and it goes down. So I think that's it. Yes?
Is the church built on top of the well, or is
Yep.
the well out in the...
You're going to see.
Okay.
You're ahead of me. All right, so the question was, is the church built on top of the well? Yes, it is, and we're going to see. This is actually a picture of the church that is there today. This photo is taken in 2020, and like I said, they've been building on it for a long time, and it was just finished in 2007. Maybe a little bit more in 2008, I don't know. But that's what it looked like in the 70s, right there. And you're going to see what it looks like today. Actually, I'll skip ahead. That's what it looks like today. So, and if you look far back here, there's a stairway right here, kind of in the center to the right, and there's a twin stairway, but it's kind of blocked by the people on the center left. So you got these two stairways, and standing at about the same spot, going back, that's what it looks like. And this is in 1970s. You can see it took a while. It wasn't like building a house today where you throw up a house in 3 months. They, some decades they didn't do anything, and some decades they went at it. And then they had an earthquake in 1927, I believe, that slowed things down. And this is another view. You got these twin staircases. And if you go in this building, staircase on the right, staircase on the left, and that's it. It's kind of, I hate to say basement. They call it a crypt, I think, and you go down there. And I believe in the 70s, the rabbi that was in charge of keeping this, he was actually murdered down here. They came in and hacked him. So yeah, there's still some security issues even today. But that is the Jacob's well in front of us. As you can see in that first picture I did back a couple, it was out in the open. And now it is, there's a well there, and you could actually go to it. I've seen videos of it, and they're standing up there. And I couldn't put a video in here, but what they did was they poured the water, and you expect to like pouring it in the sink. It's like you hear the water splashing. What he did was he poured the water, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, splash, and you hear it. That's 135 feet today from this well, how deep it is, and about 5 feet. The bottom 5 feet has water in it. That's what I've been reading. But actually, in the 1800s, the well was, somebody said it was about 35 feet. So over time, it's gotten deeper. All right, so that's what the well looks like today. A couple more pictures. That's an older picture there of what the well looks like. And you can see it's down in a crypt. There's some tourists there, and they're, lifting up water and, going up and down and drawing water from it. And if you were standing on Mount Gerizim, like the woman at the well, you're looking right at it from the this is the top of Mount Gerizim from where this photo was taken. That's the this church building, this Orthodox church building. It's right on top of the well. Okay, so we know that there was at least 3 distinct major churches. I believe there was more than that because there's not a whole lot. There's some a lot of gray area in this, and I think it was actually more. But we do know that there was a church constructed on it in 384 AD, and then there was another one that was destroyed, and there was one that was rebuilt by Emperor Justinian I around 550 AD after the first one was destroyed. Then we have the Crusader era. Built in the 12th century, the 1100s, but it was then destroyed by Saladin in 1187. So the current church, the Greek Orthodox, present day, they purchased the area in 1860 and completed it in 2007. So that's how long it took. But there was an interruption where it was destroyed in 1927, in an earthquake. And there were some years it just sat incomplete and not much happening. I don't know if it was a money issue, security issue, or what, but it was restarted again in the 80s, and they finished it up in 2007. And that's looking down the well there on the right side. Okay, the other thing you think about with Shechem, unfortunately, is this story in Genesis 34 where Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, she is seized and raped by Shechem. And Shechem, not the city Shechem, but Shechem as in a Hivite prince who then falls in love with her and wants to marry her. While Jacob remains passive upon hearing this violation, Dinah's brothers are enraged by this act committed against the family, and the brothers deceive Shechem and his father Hamor by agreeing, yeah, we'll let you marry him, but only if all of you get circumcised. 3 days later, while all the men of the city are still recovering and in pain, Dinah's brothers Simeon and Levi, they launch an attack, killing all the males, including Shechem and Hamor, and rescued their sister. So the other sons of Jacob plunder the city, and while Jacob fears retaliation, the brothers defend their actions as just revenge for their sister. Now, this is just a brief summary of the story. There's a lot more detail in it if you read Genesis 34. I don't know, there may be a debate today where, it was put in the Bible as rape, but then other people might say that, well, it was more defiled. So maybe, Dinah was a willing partner. We don't know. But there's more detail in Genesis 34, but just remember that this happened here at Shechem. Okay. Shechem was also the site where Joseph's bones were buried after the Exodus. And you read about it in Joshua 24:32. And Joseph's bones, which the Israelites have brought up from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. All right. Joseph, dies in Egypt? I can't remember, but he wanted his bones brought up from Egypt and put into Shechem because this is where the promise was made to Abraham. All right. And so, yes, there is a tomb of Joseph there. I don't know. I believe it was in the 300s or something where this is recognized as a place where Joseph was buried. And if you would go to it today, that's pretty much what it looks like there. It's 300 meters away northwest of Jacob's Well, and it's at, where the valleys of Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal meet. It's an important pilgrimage destination. The Jews, recognize it as one of their holiest sites. And also, not only Joseph, but his sons Ephraim and Manasseh are said to be buried here. Let's see. So, but the Muslims, they say, no, this is the tomb of Sheikh Yusuf al-Dawak, kind of a local holy man who they say was walking around and healing people by, reciting verses from the Quran. I don't know anything about that. But, Christians have said that this was a location of, since the 4th century, the 300s, that this is where Joseph is. And this is, just a hop, skip, and a jump, a literal hop, skip, and a jump from, where Jacob's well was. Another view of it. And, just a little bit more of the history. Oh, this is an older photo I found. And I was like, oh, that's, I love old photos and, how things used to look. And I've actually found video from Jerusalem from like the late 1800s where somebody went in and then somebody changed the video and modified it and made it 4K, which was really cool. And then they added sound and added color. And so you're like looking at a modern film, but it's an old video with all the all the scratches, and they took out all the scratches and the jerkiness of the video out and made it 4K. That was really neat. I love seeing stuff like that, and I love seeing old photos. But this was a photo from Joseph's tomb. All right, and that's what you would see today. You see the UN truck over here because this place here is this is a Muslim area, and the Jews consider it a holy site, and the Muslims don't want them to come visit, and come here. So there's a lot of fighting here, and then sometimes the Muslims have done things like destroy the dome on this tomb or paint it green like the color of Islam, and so there's a lot of back and forth. And again, Joseph's tomb just a couple hundred meters away from Jacob's well, and Tell Balata right here. So it's all really close by, and it's really kind of hard. And here's another what you would see on Google Maps, and you can see, just 4 or 5, maybe 5, 6 blocks away from Jacob's well, and then, you got Tell Balata here. So this here, we're pretty much, 100% this is the land that Jacob owned. Okay. All right, and this is another picture of Joseph's tomb. On the right side, I believe that was in the 90s, where you see the IDF soldiers escorting them there. And because of the security situation, I think the Oslo Accords said, hey, this is going to be starting to be controlled by the Palestinian Authority. The Jews say, hey, this is a holy site for us, and you're going to give it to the Palestinians. So there's a lot of friction about this particular location. And then sometimes they just can't go there at all. And sometimes tourists can't even get there unless they kind of work it out with the IDF, the Israeli soldiers. So the one on the right, I think it was taken in 96. The one on the left, that picture there was taken 3 weeks ago. They started allowing them again. So still, these locations, it's in the center of a lot of hostility, a lot of friction, a lot of religious friction there. Okay. And this is a picture from the inside of the tomb. I got this from the maidenproject.com. And, Joseph's bones are not actually in that sarcophagus stone thing, but, it's there as a symbol that, he's buried here in this area. I don't know what else I could say about that. There was something about they burnt things over here. I think gold covered incense. I had to look it up again, but sometimes they had little ceremonies down here. Okay, but that's a picture of inside Joseph's tomb. All right, so Shechem, the other thing you can think about was the covenant renewal. So after entering the promised land, Joshua gathered the tribes of Shechem, and half stood on Mount Ebal and half on Mount Gerizim to hear the blessings and the curses of the law. And we read about this in Joshua 8. And again, you got those 2 bowls there, and it's a perfect place to put a lot of people and stand in the middle of it and shout and be heard. Can't do it today because of all the buildings in the way and things blocking sound from traveling. But, it was tested in the 1800s, and they wrote about it and said, yeah, it worked. Okay. So we read, and Joseph built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, and we believe we know the exact spot for this, the God of Israel. As Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites, he built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There in the presence of the Israelites, Joseph wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses. All the Israelites, elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses gave the servant of the Lord, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. Afterwards, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and the children and the foreigners who lived among them. I believe these blessings and curses, it's in Deuteronomy chapter 7, I believe. I don't know. 27. All right. And just, I can't read the whole thing. 27 and 28. Just before entering the promised land, the Israelites gathered here the law, the curses for disobeying it, and the blessings for obeying it. And you read about all the blessings and the curses in Deuteronomy, I can't say the word, 27 and 28. And in doing so, the Israelites recommitted themselves to the covenant, pledging to obey God under the penalty of the curse. With the disobedience at Jericho occurring just before the worship under Joshua, it was time for the nation to commit itself to God again. It was time to be reminded of the consequences associated with the covenant and to worship the Lord, and covenant faithfulness are to be the priorities for God's people. And you can see on the left the curses for disobedience and the blessings for obedience. Only 5 minutes left, so I'll let you read that for a second. A couple examples: destroyed crops and then plentiful crops. It was, things that, hey, when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, these are the good things that's going to happen. Good rain. If you don't, there's going to be the famine. So there's always going to be a problem. The one that's really jumped out at me was, disobedience there down near the bottom. It says you will borrow from other nations rather than lend, and then, for obedience, you would lend to other nations rather than borrow. So I would rather be a lender than a borrower. Okay. Here's, another view. So I got this picture on the internet somewhere, and so I have to figure out who to give credit to. But, you got Shechem there off to the right. You got Mount Ebal, which is on the north. So we're kind of facing north and a little bit to the west. And we're kind of taking this picture here from atop Mount Gerizim. You can see right in between, that's where the ark, Joshua, and the elders would be. The 6 tribes on the left, the 6 tribes on the right, or north and south. And then Shechem to the right. You could see, kind of visualize how they were standing. All right. Here's another. Throw this map in, just looking down, straight down, satellite view. Get this from Google Earth. You see Shechem, Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, and right up there where that pin is, it says Ebal altar. That may be the one. We believe that that's the one that actually Joshua had done. There's some videos on it. Maybe next week I can start sharing a little bit more information about that as I cover the mountains. Okay. The other thing, the covenant renewal. There was another renewal again. So Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to renew the covenant with God after entering the promised land. He did this in Joshua 24, but he also did it in Joshua 8, and he also did it in Joshua 24. And I was like, wait a minute, was there 2, or am I reading the same event twice? So the first one was done immediately after they entered the land. And then the one in Joshua 24 is the final comprehensive. He does another commitment ceremony just before he dies. All right, and you read about that here. And for the sake of time, I'm going to skip and read just this one verse here. In verse 25, on that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people, and there at Shechem, he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws. And in verse 26, and Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. And that's the picture of the stone there on the right. And they believe this is the actual, okay. There's always going to be somebody that's going to disagree, but this is a real good, almost a slam dunk, 100%, that this is a stone that Joshua set up. And here's a picture of it today. It's called the Maseba Standing Stone. The guy on the left there I've used a lot. I can't remember his name, but he's wrote some books and atlases and things on the Bible. And we got one of his copies before we went on the tour that they gave to us. And then I realized I had one of his earlier versions that I ordered years ago, and he's very knowledgeable. He does really great videos on the exploring Bible lands. And he does this great video on this stone about how it was found and how the workers started busting it up and how it was saved. There's a little bit of a story to this stone. But anyway, he believes, and he makes some really good points that this is the actual stone that Joshua had set up and put the laws of God in plaster on the sides. Okay, and it was also the witness stone. Okay, and that's where it stands today. This is Tell Balata. A couple minutes left. I'm not going to be able to finish, unfortunately, but Tell Balata, and you can still see that stone standing there. Right behind it is there's this temple or building, and we're going to read about this building that stood right here in the Bible. Also about this stone was Abimelech. Maybe jumping ahead, we might get to it, but here's again, just reorient yourself with the map. Jacob's well here at the bottom, Joseph's tomb over here towards the top, and then towards the west of that, Tell Balata. This is where ancient city of Shechem was, and zooming in on that, this is what it looks like there. Let's see. So yeah, and you got Mount Gerizim there in the left side at the top there. So yeah, really, really close at the base. So Tell Balata, very important, site for archaeology. They believe it started around 4500 BC. They mention Cyclopean walls, and I had to look into that. What is a Cyclopean? I read Cyclop, like one-eyed, monster, but Cyclopean, and it has something to do with they take the big rocks that they're not squared up like in a block. They're just rough cut, roughly in a shape of square, and then the gaps that they create, they put a bunch of smaller stones in it. I guess it's a way to build a wall quicker than trying to make it perfectly even. The other thing want to know about this Tell Balata is the fortress temple, and it's also called the Migdal or the Tower Temple, and this is the temple of what they believe is Bel Berith that is mentioned in the Bible. Okay. And the other thing that they found at Tell Balata there at the bottom is they found some 2,500-year-old Macedonian coin. So that's impressive when you find a coin from 2,500 years ago. All right. Again, this is, it's a shame that I never get to go to this place. So the temple of Bel Berith that we saw there, this is the base of it, and there's another picture of it. But jumping ahead, the temple of Bel Berith, it's also known as the fortress temple or the temple of the covenant. And this was, Migdal, the Hebrew word for tower or fortress temple. Very massive. The walls were incredibly thick, 5 meters. I've seen some people say 17 feet, some people say 16 feet, but walls at that size at the base, that indicates that this was several stories tall. And, it was a big building, and it was a rectangular building, and they had single entrance flanked by 2 massive towers, and then inside was a large hall. There was a podium, then there was the sacred pillars, and these sacred pillars and standing stones represented the presence of a deity, or it was a witness to a legal contract like the covenant, the witness stone, and this lines with the account in Joshua 24, which, this stone describes Joshua taking a large stone and setting it up under an oak tree near the sanctuary of the Lord at Shechem to serve as a witness to the people's promise. Let's see. So, and then we read about this temple, the Bel Berith. The citizens of Shechem took, in Judges chapter 9, took 70 pieces of silver from the house of Bel Berith to fund Abimelech's rise to power, indicating that the temple also kind of functioned as a bank as well. All right, and then it was destroyed by fire. And you could prove that today with the archaeological digs that are going on. It shows there was a violent end to the structure. And in Judges 9, Abimelech, early in the chapter, they're raising money for Abimelech. And then towards the end of the chapter, Abimelech burns it down, the Tower of Shechem, with about 1,000 people inside. So it was a big building with 1,000 people in there. Because they fled in there for safety, but he burned it down, and they've done excavations, and they revealed a thick layer of ash and charred debris dating to the 12th century BC. All right. Okay, we are past time, so I am going to hold off there, but I'll just show you this real quick picture. This is kind of an artist's view of what the tower looked like, but again, it was several stories tall, so this is kind of a shorter version of it, but it was a lot taller than that. Again, this is just an artist's view, and just kind of a rough idea that there was these two towers in the front. They had these two witness stones on either side, and there was one in the front, and there was some kind of altar there in between those. So we were going to stop there. Unfortunately, I did not have time to finish. I kind of figured that would happen. There's so much to know about Shechem. There's so much things that happen in the Bible there. And now when I look at it, I no longer think of a city with a weird name. There's a lot more to it. It's, after Jerusalem, if you try to want to tell me, what are the top 5 cities of the Bible that we should know, I'd now, knowing what I know now, would have to put Shechem in one of the top 5 cities of the Bible that we need to know as Christians. Okay, thank you very much. I've got a couple minutes.
Thank you very much, David. As always.